have a really diverse representation of different wireless things on our panel. We have, and I'll go in order, we have Michael Finnerty, who is in charge of global strategy, and he says all global strategy at the Weather Company, recently purchased by IBM. We have Jeff Yee, who's Vice President of Technology Planning and Partnerships at ZTE, and a decade ago, he authored a book called Making Money on the Mobile Internet, which is quite prescient. And then we have John Fine, founder and managing director of Firebrand Ventures, where he invests in early stage software startups, and he has a particular focus on companies from the greater Midwest. Then we have David Wyden, who is a general partner at Khosla Ventures, where he invests in mobile internet, enterprise, and financial services. And then last but not least, Greg Emmerich, who's executive vice president and co-founder of drone software company Sentera. He does a lot of agriculture, infrastructure inspections, and he's also a commercial pilot. And today we're here to talk about who is going mobile and why, some of the trends in consumer adoption. And like I said, and now you know, we have a wide representation of quite different views and viewpoints into the wireless world. So I thought it would be good to sort of get a sense of that diversity that we have here. And I wanted you to talk a little bit about everyone's favorite, what is the most unique, what is the most unexpected, weird use of wireless that you have witnessed in your line of work? And we can just go down the line.
So for me, wireless is ubiquitous, just like weather is ubiquitous increasingly, right? Everybody in the world really needs weather at some level. And we're at this really unique intersection between being a data company, and that's really why IBM acquired us back in February, and being a media company as the Weather Channel that many of you guys probably know. The thing that inspires me most over the last few years is really live video. What wireless has been able to do for video sharing and video capture around the world, we're deploying freelance, essentially virtual freelance videographers around the world whenever there's a disaster, whether that be with drones or with cameras on phones, and they're real-time streaming content to us around the world so that we can actually essentially use weather almost as a uniting principle to make people safer and kind of satisfy that mission that we have of reducing weather-oriented deaths around the world.
Yeah, unique applications. This one comes to mind because only about a month ago I was at a hackathon, sat down with some developers, and in a 24-hour period they developed a mechanical glove that could rotate your fingers, all based on wireless instructions. So it was only 24 hours, they didn't completely build it out, but imagine a smartphone application. Imagine turning it over to the developers of Guitar Hero, and you can code it to basically move your fingers. So how to play the guitar, how to learn to play piano, physical therapy applications. That's just, I think that's one example. It's the fun part about being in this business is you get to see a lot of cool, really unique things. Next.
So I think in the connected home space, not just controlling connected devices with your phone. I think that's kind of like the most basic version of that. But the things that people are doing, some custom development and routines that are now you see getting developed on different platforms. SmartThings is one example, where you can get really, really creative about performing specific functions based on really specific triggers. Just cool stuff like if somebody rings your doorbell, you automatically trigger your camera, you can see a live view, you can record, monitoring all of that remotely. And then also the impact that the connected home is having on people with disabilities. And so there are these things that beyond just convenience, I think from a wireless standpoint, with IoT and connected home, it's really having a big impact on people's lives who really need that technology.
So what I would say is most unexpected to me over about a 5-year time frame is that the such rapid adoption of third-party messaging applications that carrier-based SMS and MMS are actually declining. And I wouldn't have thought that certainly 5 to maybe 8 years ago. And even though I think the carriers are still in, it's a great business, they make a lot of money, I think their prospects are very good. It is, I don't think in and of itself it's a good thing for the carriers because it's one other way in which they're selling data to whether it's WhatsApp or Facebook or Snapchat, rather than having a much higher position in sort of the value chain that the consumer uses. In particular, it's striking that in that way, the carriers have sort of lost control of the consumer identity. And it used to be a phone number, and now the way most people use their phones, the phone number is not the most important communication identity that they're using on the phone. And that's surprising that that has changed and has changed so fast.
Okay.
So our company does a lot in agriculture and millions, tens of millions of acres of data that gets collected and moved around. So for us, it's very common to see stuff with corn and soybeans. We have a customer that uses our technology in Colombia that tracks the life cycle of tortoises, which is far outside what transpires in the Midwest. So for us, it's been a really interesting experience to see them and actually have to use that data transfer technology that Cellular provides them and is able to move that data to other locations around the globe that a global organization is actually doing this, and this is one remote application for that.
So when we think about these developments that are happening, and you touched on the major themes, right? The connected home, the innovations that help people overcome disabilities, or a way to connect data and bring tremendous troves of data from middle of the field to a farmer's computer. All these things are happening, and I was thinking in terms of challenges, there's spectrum, and we'll get to that in a minute, but also cost. And so I guess, well, first I wanted to pose a question to the venture private equity investor types on this panel. Who will pay for all of this in the long run? Where does this cost come from?
Pay for,
Which part?
yeah, which part? Yeah.
For the costs of these products in the long run. So in terms of home improvement, in terms of home connectivity, and the products that we were talking about, like the hand, these things, for like the costs that we're dealing with right now, the consumers will in general talk about how much money they will spend on wireless data. And in terms of the wireless carriers, they will say, well, the data costs are actually dropping and we're losing money on that. In the long run, who pays for this surge of connected devices?
I'll take a stab at that. I think, by and large, ultimately the consumer pays. There's a tremendous amount of innovation in this industry that does not need venture capital. I would say the vast majority happens without needing venture capital or private equity. And a lot of that is because of the nature of the wireless industry that has high fixed costs, and then after that it makes a lot of money. So there's a huge amount of profit in this. We invest in some other sectors where that's not true at all. There is no industry, and so there's no flywheel throwing off money to get things going. In wireless, it's not, if you look at the core players in the ecosystem, and let's just take some examples, Verizon, Apple, and Google, these companies make a huge amount of money, all three of those companies, and all three of them spend a tremendous amount of money on R&D, billions of dollars. So now all that money comes from consumers and businesses that use their services, but their margins are so high now that they have a huge amount of money to continue to innovate. The innovation from, at least what my firm would say we try to do from a venture standpoint, is to try to think about, well, what aren't they paying for that could still be a big hit? And to me, the dream company would be something like Uber, where it didn't take a lot of, Uber isn't spending a lot of money, but you could get the core idea going without that much money, leveraging what Apple's built and what Google's built and the wireless networks. And that's kind of the most exciting place for a venture person to invest, is to leverage a bunch of other investment that's happening and catalyze the one conceptual leap that people couldn't see.
For me, I've been working with some major automotive manufacturers, and there's tons of sensors in all of these vehicles, and they're throwing off lots and lots of data. And the analysis that has to happen with essentially every decision is how much of that data and how often should I be transporting that data off the vehicle, and what is the ROI relative to maintenance, warranties. We all like to think about like the new business models or the new revenue streams that would come in, but it's also the cost savings that can start to come from that. We just announced a big partnership maybe 3 or 4 months ago with GoGo in-flight, and we're actually taking all of the turbulence data off of airlines. The Weather Company powers about 90% of the airlines in the world, 55,000 flights a day, and we've essentially created with GoGo the ways of airlines. We can actually see what the turbulence structures are in the air, and we can relay them across to other airlines. Ultimately, that saves in maintenance costs, because if there's a certain amount of turbulence, that plane is required to come off the line and be inspected and checked. And so having that real-time data access creates savings at that level. And so then I think that's really where a lot of the ROI, at least early on, is gonna come from.
I wanted to pose a question to Greg about this, the work that you do. It's very global, right? So we talk about something that comes as a second wave to the connected world. And what I mean by that is sort of the large portion of the world still has yet to come to smartphones. We talk about, the FC chairman yesterday mentioned that more people are connected to the mobile network now than to the electric grid. So we're kind of coming into this world of connected devices at a time when a lot of people out there haven't even crossed the line into smartphones. How do you convince, or how do you make the case for companies in those countries to make the jump to, in your case, drone technology? And I want to pose a similar question to you, Jeff, as well later.
Sure. Well, I think it comes down to ROI in the end. That's really what it ultimately will end up being. If the customer can recognize an opportunity to generate enough revenue to invest in something like that, that's probably what they'll do. There is some level of convenience that's meaningful and matters. It could be timeliness. You start talking about weather, and that's a big part of agriculture as well. And to sort of combine all of those things and have access to some of that, it might be decision-making that is part of that too. And it's not only the health of the crop and the things that we're able to identify, but it might be just making a decision to harvest today instead of tomorrow because it's going to rain. So that to me would be probably where you're going to see that be helpful to them.
What about you, Jeff?
Well, I'd actually argue that, especially in emerging markets, it is mostly smartphones now. Last year, ZTE sold about 70 million phones, 56 million were smartphones. So I think that transition already is occurring, and it occurred when you can get the price point of an Android-based phone specifically to be less than $100. And that's when they switched from feature phones to smartphones.
Right, so the point of cost comes up again. I guess, Mike, could you talk about that? This is part of, I mean, your whole job is to explain to people the value of data, right? So how do you make that jump?
So, I mean, I think for us, we were just actually having a conversation earlier with our teams around international globalization expansion of our products. And it really, Jeff's totally right. The shift to smartphones is there. It's really about how much data and how often that data is used, and do they see value in the experiences that you're providing them. So, I think we're in a really unique position as a consumer weather experience, because ultimately when people check the weather, they don't really care about the dew point or the barometric pressure. They're trying to make a decision. What do I wear today? What's my commute going to be like? In emerging markets, it's increasingly, when do I plant? When do I harvest? Or is flooding going to occur in Jakarta today because of the rainstorms? They're not wired like most Americans are to check the weather in certain ways. And so for us, it's really about making sure that you're delivering an experience that is providing that immediate visceral value, and doing it in as light a way as you possibly can. And if you can do that well, I think that it starts to open a lot of consumers' minds to how powerful these devices and these networks actually can be to getting stuff done, because you're putting it in their daily habit, and they're putting it into more of a utility framework for their personal interests.
So how do you do that when the network isn't there, or when the network doesn't stand up to the things that you dream to do? And Greg and I talked about that a little bit. How do you do that in rural America when the connectivity doesn't support the amounts of data that you want to carry.
Well, go ahead.
No, please, go.
One of the things that we do is we provide the ability for the customers, farmers, co-ops, growers, whoever they are, to actually process the data at the field edge and then allow them to bring that to the cloud when they have connectivity again. So that's an option that they have available to them, and that's usually...
That seems like a lot of steps involved.
Well, it is, but if you don't have the connection, then that's frustrating for everyone, but nonetheless, you need to be able to do it. We do some things to move around that. John Deere Corporation, we work with them directly. We process at the edge where we don't have connectivity, and we can help them create prescriptions and push it straight to the tractor before it ever goes through another process, just in the event that we don't have that connectivity. So we have to work around it where it's necessary to help them make that happen.
And we're actually looking at right now in emergent markets, low energy Bluetooth peer-to-peer kind of connections. So the idea of installing some form of an SDK that would allow for phones, feature phones or smartphones to be able to connect with one another essentially to relay any sort of severe messages. I mean, that's the thing that we're most concerned about when connectivity is down is, are people most informed? Usually nowadays, I think if I see the stats that 80% of the world is covered with cellular access, but only maybe 20 or 30% of the world actually has the ability or the means to connect to it. What we want to do is we want to make sure that the severe weather information, severe alerts, keeping people safe is actually available to everybody.
But what about the next step? Like, what if I do have that app that tells me about my field and the stuff that's growing there, and I want to make sure it tells me in real time, but my connectivity isn't very good. Is there, I guess what I'm driving at is there a move or is there effort or some new idea that's out there to actually improve
the coolest one we've seen is that kind of low energy Bluetooth peer-to-peer connections where that everybody with these devices would actually be able to connect back to where there's a stronger signal, so that then there's a relay essentially for that type of information.
Folks in the venture capital community, are there, when you look at, I guess, when you think about wireless as a business model, is mostly what you see, what David was talking about earlier, kind of taking out, filling in the gaps or where wireless connectivity already exists, and then you sort of put this creative new product on top of it? Or are there any ideas that you've seen or heard or considering for, I guess, taking a bite out of the original wireless infrastructure Apple? I don't know.
Yeah, for me, it's a lot of the ones I've been looking at are leveraging the existing infrastructure, maximizing their product or platform according to the bandwidth that they have access to, but then also developing for future. So there's a lot of stuff we've been looking at that's not quite ready yet, or actually it's the opposite. The infrastructure isn't quite ready for it yet, but it will be, and so that's a lot of what we're looking at.
A bit more specific. What do you mean?
Sure. Just so for example, like AR and VR. So there's a lot of AR and VR sort of cloud-based platforms out there that require quite a bit of wireless connectivity. And they might be minimally functional now, but they'll really make a huge impact in the next 2 to 3 years. And so that's one example, I would say, of some of the ones that we've been looking at.
David, in terms of, like, are there new ways of, I guess, creating business models within wireless?
Yeah, I'm sure there are, and if people have ideas, we'd love to invest in them if they're good ideas. The other thought that came to mind with that question is, I think investing in companies that are competing with the carriers themselves has turned out to not work very well. So I think the carriers are actually in the best position from a competitive standpoint, at least relative to the kind of upstarts that a venture capital firm would invest in. I think hardware companies, I'll leave ZTE alone, and I know you guys do more than just hardware, but let's take Apple. I think is much more vulnerable than the carriers. Apple's a fabulous company, but I think Apple's smart enough to be completely paranoid about being knocked off by some wave of devices that come from startups. So I'm not saying that's easy, but it's sort of inevitable. Not that Apple will go away, but that there'll be success. It's much easier to invest in companies that have a novel consumer device than it is to invest in companies that want to build a carrier network to compete with Verizon. The easiest thing to invest in, again, to me, is something like Uber that's creating a new category where there really is no competition. It's a whole new way of doing something and it catches on. So that's, if you do that and get it right, that's the best kind of investment or best kind of company for someone to start.
From kind of 300 feet away, like from a long distance away, it seems like where we're heading is wireless business model where data is the ultimate moneymaker. Is that inevitable? Is that kind of what's going to be in our line of sight 5 to 7 years ago?
I think so. I think IBM thinks so. I think internally we refer to data as the oil, the new oil, to all kind of engines and decision making that's going on. It's a matter of, though, not just hoarding the data. I think about big data, people just hoarding all of this information. You got to actually turn it into an insight, and ultimately you got to turn it into an action. Action's what you get paid on, right? Whether it's a marketing decision with media, or it's a consumer application making a decision, or it's a business deciding where that fleet should be at what time to deliver certain products. So it's the data for sure, but it's really on top of that the ability to take that data and turn it into an insight, ultimately turning it into an action.
I want to hear from you, Jeff, in terms of that question. Since you guys do kind of, as David said, you're known as a hardware company.
Yeah. So we're a hardware company, and I'd agree we're probably in a state of paranoia all the time. But that's a good thing, because when you look at Nokia and BlackBerry, I mean, there's companies that disappear off the face of the earth very quickly. And I think that drives us. So, we know that, we understand that, and you have to constantly be innovating. And so I don't think it's a bad thing. I think you look at the past and you recognize that could be your future, and it drives you harder. But I think your question was data.
Right.
So data, the carriers own the data pipe. So just to differentiate between what carriers own, to me, I still see that as a commodity business. I think the true value is the bits and bytes that are going across that. Who owns the data? But that's only as valuable as how you use that. And I think there's some companies that are doing really creative things with how they use that data, and there's others that probably are missing the boat.
Speaking of missing the boat, and slightly in a different, from a different line, I was thinking of how, in the US, and I'm at NPR, so we focus quite a bit on the US as a domestic market. And you sometimes hear about trends that happen in other parts of the world, and I think to myself, why isn't that happening here? And one kind of very obvious example is mobile money. It's blowing up elsewhere. In the US, doesn't seem to happen. Are there other, and I know, David, you've done some work on mobile money. Maybe you can talk about it. Why is that one example, but are there other examples of things that do and don't work in the US versus elsewhere?
Well, money is certainly a good example, and sometimes markets suffer from being ahead and then they get totally leapfrogged by somewhere that was behind. And certainly this is what's happened in money and mobile payments, where sort of famously M-Pesa in Africa has arguably the most sophisticated true mobile payments and mobile money system in some ways in the world. And it grew out of because people there only had feature phones, and they only used cash and had such poor banking infrastructure and such poor payments infrastructure that the only thing they could do was jump all the way to an easy-to-use, completely interoperable mobile payment system. Whereas in the US, people still mostly pay with their MagStripe credit card. And the US is having a lot of trouble just getting adoption of the chips inside credit cards because people just don't care that much. And the data around fraud is good enough that it's not that big a difference. So I think that's a particularly strong example where being ahead almost made the US more behind. The flip side of that is now the US, I would say, in most regards is the global center of innovation in mobile, and that wasn't true 10 years ago. 10 years ago, I would say the US was behind both Asia and Europe. And in some ways that happened because the US was behind, so it innovated with both iOS and Android in a way that just vaulted past what, what iMode had and what Nokia had. So things go in waves.
On mobile money, do you think the US is like missing the boat? Is it gonna be a thing we'll look back to? And
I think it sounds funny to say, but I think, no, we're catching up. We're catching up to Africa and catching up to Japan. And, you can see it in cabs in Las Vegas. It, supports, most people are still paying with their credit card, but you can tap your phone and pay. So I don't think we're hopelessly behind. And the reason we're behind there is because it's not that hard to take out your credit card and swipe it. So we're talking about saving somewhere between no seconds and 1 second in payment convenience. So the value proposition it's taken a while to get there, but it's getting there now.
I put mobile health in that same category for the same reasons, actually. Just like there's, you can walk to a bank down the block here, or you can walk to an urgent care center or a hospital here. That's not the case.
Out of necessity arises
That's right.
creativity.
That's right. And so, there's, Techstars invested in one company that has a really slick mobile EKG. And their first market, and where the most demand is Haiti. And that's just one example. And there are other countries in Africa as well. So anyway, I think same concept for the same reasons. I hope that the U.S. is going to catch up in that area too, because I think there's a lot of value there. But yeah, that's definitely something that we've seen for sure.
And do you think the U.S. hasn't caught up primarily because we have the convenience of the clinics and whatever, or is there something more to it?
Yeah, I think it's mostly just the need, but I do think as the technologies mature and they become even more compelling than they are today in the healthcare side, there's going to be greater adoption in the U.S.
In that vein, what do you see as some of the not hyped, not well covered innovation that's happening now that will really catch up to us 5-7 years from now, that will say, it was really major in our life? And,
well, sure.
I'll go.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. The things that we're seeing today are really quite interesting in the agricultural world, for example. And the same holds true in the cellular telephone industry. People that are in the decision-making positions or the ability to counsel someone who's maybe at the field edge or on a tower are looking for the ability to do more with less. And so if they can get this information back to the cloud and they can access that information, they operate much like a radiologist would and can help many people from one position and not have to travel. And so we're seeing that a lot in agriculture, and we're seeing that in the cellular telephone industry, and I think that is across many different industries, we'll continue to see a lot of that happen.
What do you think is like the next industry to pick that up?
Gosh, you guys have a better crystal ball than me, I think. So.
Well, maybe we can pick that up. David, what do you think is the less hyped?
I think miniaturization and better power management have all kinds of implications. One observation at this conference, and some of it's because this conference is a very carrier-specific oriented conference, I'd say 5G and bandwidth are overhyped. Like we got a lot of bandwidth. Like, yeah, there's a few things. There's more that we can do with more bandwidth, but over the next 5 years, over the next 5 to 10 years, I think having more bandwidth and lower latency, like yes, it will enable some new applications, but a much bigger deal is being able to have smaller devices that use less power. So like if you look at an Apple Watch, the problem with an Apple Watch is not that there's not enough bandwidth. The problem is that it's this big thing on your wrist that you've got to charge every night. And things like that will totally change, not so much with a watch, but with all kinds of prosthetic limbs and monitoring devices that can be in your body, or you can have things in fields where you don't need to change the battery except annually. You can have totally different kinds of alarm systems and telemetry systems, and all of that. None of that needs more bandwidth. It all needs smaller things that need less power, and that's changing so fast. I think it's changing faster than building 5G networks. So that creates all kinds of exciting things, I think.
I think for me, it's almost a combination of both of those ideas. We're constantly focused on the micro moments that happen every single day, of how we're actually taking those little improvements in miniaturization, coupled up with the ability to process quickly and create that real-time decision making. So,
I'm sorry, but what's a micro moment?
A micro moment for us is it's essentially like, how can you help make a decision faster in the little decisions that you have to make each and every day? And that might be a business, or it might be a personal interaction. So what time should I leave in the morning? And how is weather influencing the intersection that I often cross? And if weather's playing a role in that, can I actually be making a decision to leave a little bit earlier so that I'm making improvements in my commute along the way? Or am I allocating a certain amount of my my wind energy at the right time, because I have that kind of gust that's coming in the forecast? And so each and every one of these decisions is kind of like a micro decision that has to happen, and you need to have the processing power. I feel like all of us probably read so much and hear so much that we probably know everything that's generally speaking going on. But I think that artificial intelligence, that real-time data processing aspect is going to be the big thing that really starts to move value propositions.
Yeah, one of the most least hype, I'm going to generalize this and just put it in a category called 3D. So there's a couple of projects already out there. It's public. Google's working on. One is Project Tango. The other is Solely. But to me, it's a freedom away from the two-dimensional space. Our smartphones, we look at it, we do gestures based on two-dimensional space. And it's the freedom to be able to interact in various different ways, that you're not just putting your finger like this. Now, for a smartphone, 5 years from now, yeah, we're probably still interacting like that, but the real problem comes in other devices that we want to do. It's hard to take that screen, pack all the information into a watch. It's even harder for the IoT devices. So the challenge that we have is getting that information, allowing someone to interact with it in a way that's probably a little bit unique. And to me, the way to do it is exactly like how we operate today. We think we see everything in three-dimensional space. We interact in three-dimensional space. And what we want to do next is to allow the next form of user interface for all the IoT devices to do the same thing.
So you're not talking virtual reality 3D vision. You're talking real life 3D.
Yeah, yeah, and to do that, we've seen a lot of different technologies. Some are optical, even seen it using ultrasound, some using electromagnetic. But basically, it's an awareness. It's awareness of that object is there.
Gesture.
My hands are here, and all you need to do is just give developers that information, and they'll create applications out of it.
And you think 5-7 years down the road, this will be?
Yeah, it should be here in less than 5 years.
Very cool.
Okay, Elise.
And actually, we have.
Okay.
I want to hear.
I'll go quick.
Yeah, from John. And maybe we'll do one or
Q&A.
very
So
quick one.
just really quick, as much hype as some AI has gotten, I still think it's actually underhyped in compared to what's going to happen in the next 5 to 7 years. AI is a big bucket, right? So AI can be the way you interact with any device, including your smartphone, and interacting with it in a much natural human way. I don't know if anyone has ever heard Steve Wozniak talk, but that's one of his favorite topics. If you ever have the opportunity to hear him talk, he talks a mile in a minute, but he's very, very passionate about the fact that we've been interacting with our devices basically the same way for decades. And finally having AI to the point where we can interact with it in a much more natural way, can understand. So that part of AI, I think, is going to be really big in the next 5 to 7 years, and also from a machine learning standpoint, just having that aspect of AI from machine learning be invisible. So its predictive aspects be invisible and in the background, but knowing if you're getting sick, if you're at risk for a disease, pointing you proactively to resources for that. And then from a convenience standpoint, knowing what foods you like, what restaurants you might like, guiding you to those in real time based on your location, things that are already starting to happen, but really perfecting those technologies, having them, again, invisible in the background so it just becomes part of your life, I think is really interesting.
I think we have time for maybe one question, if we have any.
Does anybody have a burning question that they can't live without knowing the answer to? Anyone? Oh, come on. There is.
No burning questions. It is 5 o'clock.
Well, you know why they don't want to ask questions? They want to go get free drinks.
Oh,
That's kinda
I didn't even know there were free drinks.
Okay.
So now the cat's out of the bag. But I do have one question, which is probably a bit more prosaic than the dreaming 5 years down the road, and that is the challenge of spectrum. You hear about it all the time. It's an endless theme. There's a major hurdle in anything wireless. So I'd ask you all to think about this kind of in advance, and if you can do it really quickly, finish a sentence. If wireless was not constricted by spectrum. Mike.
I think everybody in the world would have a universal basic access. So maybe to David's point before, your phone number is essentially your identity at some level in the new world, and maybe everybody actually has a universal basic access to wireless connectivity and all the things that come from connectivity.
We would be even more connected than we are now.
So yeah, so if spectrum wasn't an issue, I think 5G would already be here. I'd be streaming video into my home, and cable companies would be out of business.
I and others like me who travel a lot could have dinner with their families in virtual reality instead of eating alone in a hotel room.
Oh, that hit home. That hit home.
Sounds kind of sad, doesn't it?
We wouldn't have to keep signing into all these annoying Wi-Fi hotspots.
Greg?
In the next 50 years, we need to double the amount of food production on the planet. And I think that that would have a profound impact on assisting with the agricultural efforts to make that kind of thing happen, and probably do wonderful things to help the environment as well.
On that imaginative note, thank you all very much for coming. Apparently there's free drinks.
Nice round of applause for Alina Cellular.